Good evening, everyone. I'm Sarah Slade, Acting CEO of State Library Victoria, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to the 2021 Stephen Murray Smith Memorial Lecture. Before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge on behalf of State Library Victoria the traditional lands of all the Victorian Aboriginal clans, their cultural practices and knowledge systems. We recognise that our collections hold traditional cultural knowledge belonging to Indigenous communities in Victoria and around the country. We support communities to protect the integrity of this information gathered from their ancestors in the colonial period. We pay our respect to their elders past and present who have handed down these systems of practice to each new generation for millennia. I'd like to extend a special welcome to our guest speaker, Rose Hiscock, members of the Murray Smith family, members of the Library Board of Victoria and Foundation Council, and all our friends and supporters joining us tonight. We are edging ever closer to hosting events in our beautiful spaces at the State Library, and I look forward to seeing your faces in real life very soon. But for now, I'm pleased that we can come together remotely to share important ideas and conversations. You'll have the chance to participate in the conversation. Please submit your questions during this event via the Slido link on your screen. The hashtag is #SMSLecture. You can vote for the questions you like to help with moderation. We'll endeavour to cover as many of them as we can following the lecture. The Stephen Murray Smith Memorial Lecture honours Stephen Murray Smith, one of Australia's great thinkers and intellectuals. He was an historian, a man of letters, an activist, an environmentalist. He made a significant and enduring contribution to Australian politics, culture and literary thought. In 1954, Stephen founded and was the first editor of the literary magazine Overland, which after 6 decades continues to foster and champion new, original and progressive writing. When Stephen died in 1988, he left a remarkable collection of personal papers and other records, which we're privileged to have as part of the State Library's Australian Manuscripts collection. The library was also fortunate to recently acquire Stephen's journals, which provide valuable insight into the vibrancy of cultural life in Victoria in the mid to late 20th century. The Stephen Murray Smith Memorial was first presented by the library in 1992. It has become one of the most popular events in our annual calendar, and with the registrations tonight, we can definitely see that. Through this lecture, we seek to promote research and debate in the broad areas of Stephen's interest and influence. Over the past 3 decades, the lecture has been delivered by a remarkable and passionate group of Australians, including Geoffrey Searle, Robert Mann, Barry Jones, Janet Holmes-A-Court, Don Watson, Malcolm Fraser, Anne Summers, Maxine McHugh, Claire Wright, Ruth Pascoe, Alexis Wright, John Fain, and most recently, Eric Jensen. Tonight, we have the pleasure of hearing from Rose Hiscock. Rose is the Director of Museums and Collections at the University of Melbourne. She has held national leadership roles within the Australian cultural sector, and her experience demonstrates a strong focus on the intersection of art and science. She's responsible for the development of the Science Gallery Melbourne, a new gallery at the University of Melbourne for young adults, and was previously Director of the Museum of Applied Arts and Sciences in Sydney. Rose is a board member of Science Gallery International and was previously Executive Director of Arts Development at the Australian Council of the Arts, where she was responsible for international programs, including Australia's representation at the Venice Biennale. Rose holds board positions with Back to Back Theatre, Chunky Move and the Melbourne Art Fair. She is committed to building an accessible, inclusive and thriving arts sector. Rose's lecture tonight is titled Why We Need to Tear Down the Borders Between Science, Design and Art in a Post-COVID World. Over the past 18 months, in a world of contact tracing and flattening the curve, we've all become acutely aware of the role of science and data in our daily lives. but what part do cultural organisations play in translating that data? Rose will discuss the role of cultural institutions as conduits for knowledge and their responsibility for addressing mistruths and making a case for breaking down the barriers between art and science. Please welcome Rose Hiscock.
Today is a celebration, and it's about the new beginning and the new life and the birthing tree. Whenever you see our fire lit, you're always welcome to sit with us in ceremony. You're always a friend of the Wurundjeri. The ancestors said this place needed smoking and something that might never ever happen again. You know, I've only seen my ancestors come a couple of times and I think you're very lucky that that happened.
It gives me great pleasure to welcome you all to the housewarming of Science Gallery Melbourne. Once we started to look at this place and dive into the archives of Melbourne University and see if there were untold stories that we could bring to light, all with this spirit of honouring place and the maternal.
I've had a look at the brickwork outside and brilliant work. You've given us a gift and I appreciate it, so thank you.
Think of the memory of trees, shedding bark in layers of memory, back to the forest floor, the underground story of deep time, growth and age, flourish and decay, rot and rejuvenation.
So we need to celebrate, and our ancestors has given us a sign to celebrate. So I'm very lucky to be here and to be able to say to you, now is the time to come together and rejoice. It's a time to look towards the future. It's a time to walk together in harmony so our children can live in peace. When we look after country and we look after each other, country truly looks after us. So Nungodjan, thank you very much.
Good evening, everyone. I'd like to start by acknowledging that I'm on the unceded lands of the Wurundjeri people and pay my respects to Aadi Dai Kerr and elders past and present, and to any First Nations people who may be listening today. You may notice that I'm sitting in an empty gallery. This is not a Zoom screen. I'm in situ at the New Science Gallery, Melbourne. The gallery is almost, but not yet open to the public. Prior to installing exhibitions and inhabiting the space, Aadi Dai Kerr generously welcomed us to her country. And the film I just showed was a small clip of our First Nations housewarming. I'd like to credit Susie Anderson, Wagaya and Wamba Wamba Woman, and Science Gallery Digital Experience Manager for her work in producing the film. I want to reiterate the words of Auntie Di: when we look after each other and we look after country, country looks after us. I'd like to thank the State Library of Victoria and acknowledge the legacy of the fabulous outgoing CEO, Kate Tawney, and acting CEO, Sarah Slade. Thank you for trusting me with this annual address. And as I sat down to write this lecture, I must admit I felt rather daunted. The Murray Smith family have, of course, made such a significant impact to the cultural life of our city. So to ground myself, I read some more about Stephen Murray Smith and realised he was ending his career at the University of Melbourne at the time I was starting as an undergraduate. And for some reason, this gave me a sense of well-being. The University of Melbourne has been a fixture in so many of our lives, and like Stephen, I've returned later in my career. I also want to thank everyone for listening. All the more impressive after 2 years on Zoom. You could be outside, so wherever I am in your house, propped on a bench top as you cook your dinner, wash the dishes, have a drink. Thank you for listening. I appreciate it. Trust, lies, and responsibility. Parcels from China can spread coronavirus. This statement is a quote from the Australian government's COVID-19 myth-busting site, a website dedicated to dispel mistruths about COVID. You may have heard this myth or others such as 5G networks are spreading the virus. Vitamin C is an effective treatment. UV rays kill the virus. If you hold your breath for 10 seconds, you're okay. Hospitals are giving out secret prevention tips. Mosquitoes spread coronavirus. COVID-19 has resulted in an extraordinary amount of misinformation in the public domain. You may not think of the cultural sector as a primary mythbuster or source of truth for health facts. However, the experiences of the last 18 months demonstrate how arts, sciences, and the creative sector can come together to inspire us to tackle mistruths and greater challenges. This talk seeks to answer a provocation: why we need to tear down the borders between art and science in a post-COVID world. I'll answer this in 3 parts: lies, trust, and responsibility. And I'll argue that there has never been a more important time for compelling and accurate storytelling. And now is the moment for the cultural sector to take a leadership role on issues that affect all of humanity. Rather than tearing down an imaginary border, I'll rephrase the provocation as what can we learn from the confluence of art and science? And I'll interpret the notion of post-COVID as code for urgency. And at the risk of undermining my own trustworthiness, I've decided to use one of the world's great storytellers and experts on lies and trust, Dolly Parton, to help frame this talk. Lies. In the song Telling Me Lies, Dolly Parton, Emmylou Harris, and Linda Ronstadt sing the following refrain: I cover my ears, I close my eyes, still hear your voice, and it's telling me lies, telling me lies. Why is it that despite our best efforts, lies seep through the cracks? Although information may be so far-fetched or untrue, fanciful, or without logic, misinformation finds its way into public conscience, just like a virus. Cast your mind back to the beginning of last year. I admit this is hard to do. The last two years of lockdowns have given us a very foggy sense of time. In February 2020, when life was normal, the Director General of the World Health Organization, Dr. Tedros Ghebreyesus, gave a speech at a Munich security conference. Dr. Tedros referred to the then emerging outbreak of coronavirus. At the time of his speech, 99% of coronavirus cases were in China, and there were only 505 cases in the rest of the world. I note that at the time of writing this lecture, there were 240 million cases and more than 4.5 million deaths from COVID-19. In his speech, Dr. Tedros said, "We're not just fighting an epidemic, we're fighting an infodemic. Fake news spreads faster and more easily than this virus, and it's just as dangerous." We're all familiar with the concept of fake news, beloved by Donald Trump, but the term infodemic might be new. The term was coined in 2003 in a Washington Post article about SARS as, I quote, "a few facts mixed with fear, speculation, and rumour, amplified and relayed swiftly worldwide by modern information technologies." When the Washington Post article was published, around 10% of the population, or 600 million people, were connected to the internet. Fast forward to 2021, there are an estimated 4.6 billion, or 59.5% of the population connected to the net, with 90% of these active on social media. And the World Health Organization now dedicates significant resources to myth-busting and addressing the infodemic, which it describes as too much information, including false or misleading information in digital and physical environments during a disease outbreak. History tells us that we've willfully covered our ears and closed our eyes to shut out the truth when we don't want to hear it. I note the current Yuruk Justice Commission truth-telling process that's occurring now under the leadership of the First Peoples Assembly of Victoria. The Commission states, "Without truth, there can be no treaty." And when we look back through history, we see examples of disregard for cultures, as well as denialism and denigration of science because of the challenge to the status quo. Well-known examples, such as Galileo, forced to recant Copernicus' theory that Earth and planets orbit the sun. The uproar and consternation in response to Charles Darwin's on the origin of the species, for presenting an alternate view to creationism. And the myriad of lesser known examples, like Hungarian physician Ignaz Semmelweis, who noticed that washing hands between patients in an obstetric ward could lower mortality. He offended his colleagues and the medical community who rejected his view. He suffered a nervous breakdown and was committed to an asylum where he died. And there are cases of scientists who were not listened to or credited because of their gender, Rosalind Franklin, Ada Lovelace. And in current times, and incredulously, the flat earth theory that has been variously and soundly debunked across countries and cultures from about 300 BC onwards, however, still draws attention and is supported by various US celebrities. I could go on. The cultural sector has an exceptionally important role to play in neutralising myths, as well as supporting and advocating for truth and evidence. During COVID-19, we've seen excellent examples of the cultural sector bringing together art and science to provide clear public information in a way that is compelling and interesting. Drawing on a combination of evidence and creativity, cultural organisations and creative practitioners have a unique platform to provide compelling public messages. The Global Science Gallery Network places the confluence of art and science at the core of its mission. Exhibitions and programs are issues-based, topical, and draw on the inherent creativity in both arts and sciences to communicate compelling content. In India, where more than 450,000 people have died from COVID-19, Science Gallery Bengaluru has been running an excellent exhibition and lecture series on the theme of contagion, tailored for young adults. Resources include a virtual exhibition where you can book a tour with a young science student and a public lecture series with topics that cover subjects in the public health interest, facts, falsehoods, managing the epidemic, modelling, a history of vaccines, policy, national response. These topics may sound dry. However, the Science Gallery approach draws on multiple layers of storytelling, notably including the perspectives of artists and young people to deliver compelling experiences. Nearly 200,000 people have viewed the series. Of course, there are many examples from around the world of museums and galleries providing factual information that links science, research, and public awareness. Engaging artists with a conversation enables a speculative exploration of a subject that may otherwise be too dry or too far-fetched. Indeed, the study of epidemics and pandemics have been regular topics within a museum context. In 2018, the Wellcome Trust marked the centenary of the influenza pandemic with Contagious Cities, a series of conversations around the global challenges of epidemic preparedness. UK artist group Blast Theory conducted a residency at the World Health Organization in Geneva as part of the program, and the program cluster of 17 cases was being installed at the Rijksmuseum in Leiden, literally as the gallery closed down due to COVID. Similarly, the Smithsonian National Museum of Natural History opened a show titled Outbreak: Epidemics in a Connected World, only to be closed due to COVID. And there are many such stories, demonstrating the role of the cultural sector in raising present topics. Here in Melbourne, Arts House programmed Pandemic in 2018 as part of its Refuge series. These are examples of the cultural sector providing clear and contemporary public information that draw on the confluence of art and science. Taking this one step further, could the cultural sector play a stronger role to become a communicator and agitator in times of crisis? In such times, how can we draw down on a bank of trust? And how do we better utilise our ability for storytelling and connection? Now, I'm not a neuroscientist, and I'm not qualified to talk about how our brain responds to art and creativity. However, I'll simply point out what everyone knows. When it comes to conveying information and storytelling, art, culture, and creativity connect us with our emotions. This feels particularly poignant when we consider what we've missed over the last 18 months. So close your eyes and think about the moment of silence and anticipation before an orchestra plays and the wave of emotion as music flows. Think about a massive stadium event, Kylie, Adele, Elton, the Stones, dare I say Dolly, as your body becomes a human conduit for sound. Think about a festival experience, Think about the smell of burning eucalyptus as you're invited onto country by an elder for a yarn. Think about the connection of pub choir, the intimacy and terror of a comedy festival show where you'll find yourself sitting with 7 other people in what feels like a broom closet at the town hall. Or that moment, unable to get up from your seat at the end of a movie or a play, embarrassed as the lights go up and you sob quietly. Or experiencing the overwhelming truth and sadness in a telling of a First Nations post-colonial story. Think about the void at the end of a great book or a great TV series that feels like a relationship breakdown. Think about the poems of Emily Dickinson, Hope is a thing with feathers, a sentiment we've needed more than ever this year. Think about stepping into the iconic museums of the world, the Louvre, the Met, MoMA, the Tate, the Guggenheim. How old were you then? Was it your big adventure? Or maybe your daily ritual from a year lived in New York? Although not in a live context, in the last 18 months, we have seen the cultural sector draw on this brilliant storytelling and emotional connection to deliver public health messages.
Dear Victoria.
We know it's been hard stuck inside for COVID lockdowns. It's been hard for us too.
Performing at home just isn't the same.
Every week, Victoria's arts community comes together to give you the performance of a lifetime.
And now it's your turn.
We need you to come together and get vaccinated as soon as you're eligible.
To give us the performance of a lifetime.
This isn't just about you as an individual soloist.
Some people can't get a vaccine, so it's an ensemble effort to make sure they're protected too. You can call a hotline or go online to make a booking.
Then jump in the queue.
And bring something to keep you entertained while you wait.
Let's go backstage.
You just check in. Get your vaccine.
Okay, all done.
Then it's time for a 15-minute interval in the observation bay. Et voila!
It's normal to get nervous before giving the performance of a lifetime.
So if you're feeling unsure about getting vaccinated,
Chat to your GP and they can help you get the facts.
Because some of the stuff you read online has some pretty massive plot holes.
While things might seem okay right now,
they're pretty carefully balanced, so let's not get complacent.
Let's give COVID its final curtain call.
And go back to what we love most.
Bringing you the best art,
performance,
and entertainment
from around Australia and the world.
So thank you, Victoria, from the bottom of our hearts.
We can't wait to give you a standing ovation.
For your performance of a lifetime.
That clip, Performance of a Lifetime, developed by the MSO with participation and support from across the performing arts sector. And there are many others. Vaccination from the music industry, and the wickedly funny, too rude to include, Get Effin' Jabbed by comedian Bev Killick. I note that these clips have YouTube views of upwards of 200,000 viewers in comparison to the government ads around vaccine hesitancy, such as the Arm Yourself Against COVID, that sit around 5,000. Providing evidence-based exhibitions and programs and a strong emotional connection is important, but not the full story. To effect change, the cultural sector has one further and compelling attribute: trust. Back to Dolly. In Teach Me to Trust, Ms. Parton says, "Teach me to trust, make me feel loved, tell me I've no need to fear. Just make me feel safe, whatever it takes. Tell me what I need to hear." Dolly clearly craves trust, don't we all? The cultural sector has earned a great deal of trust over time. To quote cellist Yo-Yo Ma, "The truth is that politics, whose currency is power, and economics, whose currency is money, only get us so far. We also need culture, whose currency is trust. The American Alliance of Museums, known as the AAM, released a study in 2001 that reported that 87% of Americans found museums to be trustworthy. 20 years later, the AAM followed up with a further study titled Museums and Trust, released this year. It found that trustworthiness of museums rated second only to trustworthiness of family and friends, and higher than the following in order: researchers and scientists, NGOs, local news, national news, US government, corporations, and social media. To put this into an Australian context, last year a report titled Political Trust and Democracy in the Times of Coronavirus, published by Democracy 2025, an initiative of the Museum of Australian Democracy, took a sample of Australians between the age of 18 to 75. The report found trustworthiness in the following order: the Army, Health Services and Police, scientists and experts, then cultural institutions such as museums at 70% trustworthiness, universities, government, TV, radio and newsprint, and on the bottom again, social media. Here in Australia, that means that about 18 million people trust information from cultural institutions. Compare that with about 4.8 million from social media. In addition to Australia's online visitation, estimated at greater than 47 million views, ABS data shows 30% of Australians actually visit museums. That's more than 7 million people. This face-to-face contact, alongside digital resources, mean that museums have an exceptionally strong platform to engage and influence. Drilling down further into the notion of trust, the AAM study asked respondents why they trust museums and drew the conclusion that, I quote, overall, the trust in museums seems to be rooted in a perception that museums are, or should be, fact-based and non-partisan and thus neutral. Only 21% of people believe that museums should take a position on important issues, even controversial ones. So whilst there's a clear role for presenting the facts, could the cultural sector play a more active role, lead the debate, and importantly, encourage change? This is a complex question. However, now might be the time to ask, which leads us to responsibility. The premise for this talk is why bring together the confluence of art and science and how the cultural sector can influence positive and long-term change. As we know, science has enabled us to live with a virus that stopped the world. In record time, vaccines were developed, and soon we'll continue with our lives post-COVID. For decades, our First Nations people, our scientists, researchers, marine biologists, students, children and artists have been alerting us to a far greater danger: climate change. And again, for decades, there've been myths and a web of conspiracy theories such as climate change is a hoax, Antarctica is cooling, climate change is part of a natural cycle, reef bleaching is fake news. There's no scientific consensus on climate change. Scientists invented climate change for the money. As you are no doubt aware, in August this year, the peak climate science body of the United Nations and the World Meteorological Organization, the IPCC, released its latest report, the sixth since the panel formed in 1988. The report is unequivocal and bleak in its findings, encapsulated by the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres as, I quote, a code red for humanity. For a great précis of the key issues, I draw attention to an article published in The Conversation 9 August titled The Most Sobering Report Yet on Climate Change, co-authored by a team of academics across the University of Melbourne, CSIRO and ANU. The article says, I quote, for the first time, the IPCC states unequivocally, leaving absolutely no room for doubt, humans are responsible for the observed warming of the atmosphere, lands, and oceans. As the article describes, the IPCC report outlines the rise in warming, increasing concentrations of CO2, increase in extreme weather events, marine heat waves, mass marine death, melting ice sheets, the retreat of glaciers, a tipping point for permafrost, rise in ocean levels. Whilst it's too late to reverse, there's an urgency to stabilise, and only then 50% likelihood of effectiveness. As we watch politicians respond to climate as a political exercise rather than a humanitarian challenge, we should not wait in the hope that they might have a change of heart and provide leadership. By waiting for action, we fall into a trap of not stepping up to our own responsibility. And this is where the cultural sector must step in and step up, understand its responsibility and act. We have the trust. How do we use it? Just like the response to COVID, museums, galleries, libraries, and the performing arts have methodically and consistently presented evidence, data, and stories and public engagement around climate change. For decades, exhibitions about drought, marine life, alternate energy, water, wind, glaciers, oceans, citizen science. In more recent years, the culture sector has been listening, learning, and bringing together First Nations art, knowledge, and storytellers as a collaborative voice. Museums with natural history or science collections have become time capsules and repositories for the impacts of climate change, and they are active researchers contributing to science. The work of Museums Victoria, the Australian Museums, South Australian and West Australian museums must be acknowledged for their research and their partnerships with universities around climate science. There are also global museums dedicated to climate change, arts organisations such as Climart, and activists, artist activists who have been working with climate content for many years. However, given the urgency, the culture sector could be doing a lot more. So how could we use our collective power and key strengths to align around a code red for humanity? University museums are in a particularly strong position to respond to this responsibility. We can be overt in our messages, not fearful of political recriminations, and we have direct access to global institutes. Through the advocacy and leadership of Vice-Chancellor Duncan Maskell, the University of Melbourne has established 2 new strategies simultaneously, a Climate Futures initiative and a new cultural strategy, the Cultural Commons. Whilst these 2 initiatives may sound disparate, their formation is not coincidental. They are aligned through timing, leadership, appetite for change, and provide a compelling opportunity to bring together science, art, and public advocacy to tell stories that need to be told. Climate action is a complex problem that intersects our economy, migration, our security, our well-being, our way of life, our food security, our survival. However, what we need to do is disarmingly simple, quoting the IPCC report. Stabilising the climate will require strong, rapid and sustained reductions in greenhouse gas emissions and reaching net zero CO2 emissions. So on the eve of COP26 Glasgow, what role can the cultural sector play in a way that politicians, policymakers, corporate boards, citizens, children take note, to show that our time has expired? We have no more options. We must reach net zero CO2. How do we draw down on the bank of trust that we have methodically built? If every museum, gallery, library, theatre company, and performance space in the world, or as many as possible, linked up and dedicated their programs and spaces to a single subject, action on climate change, thereby advocating, inspiring, and communicating trustworthy information for individuals, children, companies, and leaders to commit to and obtain net zero CO2 as quickly as possible, I believe we could have a material impact. We could change the dial. Such a program should last as long as it takes to achieve agreement on targets and an outgoing program of action. It would draw down on our levels of trust, our reach, our commitment to the facts, and our ability to connect. It would engage creatives, scientists, storytellers, and importantly, children and young people in an interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary response. This might sound simple or naive. However, given the fashionability of roadmaps, here's some ideas on how we could achieve this. One, Collusion. In the corporate sector, collusion is prohibited. However, cultural institutions and artists are willing, able, and within our rights to work together. We need to do more of it. Our sector is increasingly moving towards a collaborative co-creation model. This enables us to build a nuanced approach to programs and ideas. By working together on a single urgent issue such as climate, we can link up to build exceptional programs that benefit from collective intelligence, experts, market knowledge, and shared IP. By bringing together artists, scientists, advocates, and working in collaboration across organisations, and significantly the large cultural organisations who can often go it alone, we could co-develop exhibitions and programs that have greater, deeper resonance. This is a time to move away from a neutral position in order to simply present the facts and advocate for a position. Use our trust for a greater good. 2, scale and distribution. The cultural sector has an extraordinary distribution network, which can be used to amplify and leverage our message. The Science Gallery Network is a good example of this approach in action. Established in Dublin in 2007 with the premise to inspire curious minds through the collision of art and science, the Science Gallery Network has expanded to 9 nodes in cities around the world, each in partnership with universities. And next year, the network will commence a globally linked program of science communication regarding climate action. The program will mobilise content, experts, and creativity across multiple platforms and countries. There are many other networks within the cultural sector that could adopt such an approach. Within Australia, there are peak bodies for performing arts, visual arts, libraries, museums, galleries. There are also networks of directors and practitioners, networks of types of museums and galleries, networks of commercial galleries, science centres, university museums. If all the networks encourage their members to program and advocate around climate, we would have a massive distribution channel. And finally, who's doing the talking? We need to reconsider who's talking. Firstly, and most importantly, we need to listen to our First Peoples. In this country, we are exceptionally fortunate to have First Nations traditions of storytelling and transfer of knowledge. This practice of intergenerational knowledge gives us an insight into the importance and role of continuing culture. To quote Professor Marsha Langdon, storytelling is the original classroom where history, morality, and knowledge about people and the world are relayed to each new generation. Over 65,000 years, this tradition has maintained the transfer of knowledge regarding culture and land. We should be listening to elders. We must co-create, walk alongside, and preference our First Nations artists, scholars, and cultural leaders. We're also experiencing the voices of artists right now in the most profound ways, although often not acknowledged as overtly as they should be. The shows we're streaming across so many platforms are bulging with quality content. Our writers have never been more important. Quality journalism and critique needs to be part of our daily lives. Storytelling has new primacy. We must also listen to our young people. We know about the Thunberg effect, Greta Thunberg's influence on young people, but also how her comments, her views, her stance started to influence and get under the skin of people of all ages and political sides, including presidents of the United States. The voices of young people are the utmost important in decision-making regarding the future. Our sector knows how to reach them. Australia should be leading the way on climate change. For the cultural sector, this is a time for creative thinking and to use the confluence of art and science to lean into our responsibility for public education and mobilisation. High levels of trust, the ability to tell stories and connect on an emotional level, combined with our reach and distribution, means the cultural sector is without doubt more influential and more powerful than credited. It's time for us to also make this a personal story, to know what individual steps we can take for our own carbon footprint, and for the cultural sector to work together across art form and discipline in a clear, networked way to advocate and influence a united position on climate action. Returning to Elder Adi Dai Kerr, when we look after each other and we look after country, country looks after us. This is all of our responsibility. Thank you.
Thank you, Rose, for such a thought-provoking address. Now, we have a few minutes for Rose to answer your questions. Submit them via the Slido question function and we'll get through as many as we can. And we've got a few already. So the first one is, if the arts couldn't create a narrative to get government funding, what hope have they got of communicating to others? Is the arts' strength being narrative actually wrong?
I think that the opportunity is for the cultural sector and the arts to frankly and fearlessly link up and in a way go it alone and not care about whether we're influencing government or not. I think we really do have the networks and the power and the ability to have a real impact and think about ourselves as a platform and a distribution channel without thinking we have to convince anyone else or convince politicians. We'll take them with us.
Great, thank you. So another one, sort of a different twist on that same theme is, if the cultural sector is a conduit for valid information, aren't the same tools being used for misinformation? So how do you decide? How do people decide what to listen to?
Yeah, so I think this is the really delicate balance. So, the museums and cultural sector have built up this trust because of this fact-based practice. And so once we start holding a position and moving into a territory where we're standing for something that could be perceived as controversial, what does that do to that trust? But if I turn to the creative sector and to artists are work in a space of speculation and of thinking about possible futures, actually in the same way scientists do. Scientists are testing theories and hypotheses. So whilst I don't believe we're spreading misinformation through that process, but we are speculating on potential futures that need to be explored. I'd love to have a debate around this. It's a pity not to have a response, but it's, yeah.
Yeah, no, they're good. It's great, and they're great questions. So another questioner thanked you for such an inspiring lecture and talked about the fact that you spoke about the responsibility of the cultural sector, but who is it accountable to and how is it checked?
Yeah, right. That's a great question. And sorry, Sarah, by debate, I mean with the audience.
Yeah.
Who is it accountable to? Well, it's so interesting, isn't it? We don't have the same shareholders as a sort of corporate. So we have different stakeholders. So many have got the government as their stakeholder. Universities, I think university museums have this extraordinary opportunity right now. We really have a different agenda in that our agenda is around impact. It's not a blockbuster approach working in a university museum. It's about changing lives. It's about transformation. And so who are we accountable to? We're accountable, I think, in that context to young people, to providing leadership and showing a way. The young people piece is so important. If you think again about our reach into young adults, and say it's the NGV, that everyone's been to see a show at the NGV with that extraordinary bars of, they've done such a great job at that. It's just such a great opportunity to be thinking about how we work with young people. Now we have to do it responsibly, right? We can't just go off on, the flat earth theory, which of course we're not going to do. So my view is, if we start with evidence as a starting point, but then layer it up with speculation, with ideas, with great storytelling, then we've got this real opportunity for cut through. Excellent.
And touching on some of those points in terms of impact, so another questioner has said, so if 30% of around 7 million Australians are attending museums, that's great. But do you have suggestions about how museums, and maybe all cultural organisations, can reach some of the other of 70% of the population?
Yeah, it's a really great question. And the other pairing of that question is, it's about 60% of the world are online. That's 40% that aren't. That's actually a huge number. And of course, if you layer those maps with where those people are not online, you know, we start to talk about inequality. There's a really big inequality question in this too that I didn't have time to go into, but it's a ripper. So for the you know, the other 70%, I do think, so that's 30% that are actually visiting. We do have very high reach also with online visitation. So my view is that's quite a high number. The Australia Council for the Arts measure arts participation, and from memory there, the last it's in the 90s, high 90s, the participation from Australians in the arts. Now that includes everything from reading to movie going, but we actually have very, very high cultural consumers.
Yeah, no, it's great. So there's a few questions that are all around a sort of similar theme, which is really if we go into the space and we advocate for something, then how does that undermine the trust that we've built? How do we balance maintaining the trust that people feel in our organisations and their openness to listen to us with the fact that we would be seen to be taking active, as you said, positions on certain subjects?
Yeah. So there's another statistic in that AAM research that's really interesting around that, the percentages of people who wanted museums to be neutral. The cohort who had a high appetite for museums to take a position were people of colour. And for me, that really does say something around colonial practice. And, you know, there's a status quo. We trust a status quo. So there's a point at which we have to stand out from that. We have to take a foot sideways and debunk our own truths, you know, and start thinking in a different way. So, and for me, climate's a fact, right? So we're not going out on a limb by advocating, you know, wildly on climate, but how we do it and how we could be stronger in the way that we advocate. I think there is an opportunity, and think this is now our moment.
Yeah, that's great. So some very positive comments, brilliant and inspiring. But what support does the cultural sector need to develop their organisational decarbonisation strategies?
Well, yeah, so that's right. So we have to, you know, get our own house in order, right? And look, I think there are some really interesting changes in practice in the cultural sector. You think about touring, which was, you know, that old thing of, you know, the Holy Grail was get an exhibition put it in a container and ship it to the other side of the world. You know, those kinds of practices are falling away, and we're thinking more and more about how do we co-curate an exhibition in two hemispheres without the travel. So I think the sector has a fair way to go on getting its house in order. It's certainly something that we think about within the Science Gallery network. But you know, it's the piece around we've got to have very truthful conversations. I also note that there are some. I don't at all want to say that the cultural sector hasn't been working on this. Like, we absolutely have been, but it's really about really stepping in, leaning in right now.
Yeah, that's good. So another questioner says, while the role of museums is vital and that you've made a brilliant case for this, have you any indications about how the same are recording history? So how the institutions are recording history?
Yeah. So, and again, the decolonising piece comes into this as well. What stories do we keep? Who makes those decisions? Whose voices do we listen to? You know, I think there is a real reckoning for museums at the moment around what are the stories that we keep and what are those narratives. It's a really exciting time to be in museums. Like, it really does feel like a shifting of the way that we work and whose voices, you know, are part of the conversation.
Yeah, no, it's good. And very good segue to the next question, which is that younger folk are really important, they agree, but what about us older folk?
Yeah, and particularly the intergenerational piece, right? So my own personal view is that interplay between generations, and particularly elders and young people, is is super, super important. Again, I mean, I sound like a poster girl for universities, but I do love them. It's one of the things that universities do honour elders. They do. They really do respect people with discipline expertise. So yeah, I think there is absolutely a place for both. Yeah, and again, ideally together. We do a process of think tanks where we bring in young people and we bring in experts into and have conversations together, and they're great. They really take the conversation into uncharted and exciting territories.
Oh, that's good. And this is probably the last question that we've got time for. There are a few more, so my apologies to anyone who we haven't got to their question. But to end on, artists and scientists conform to quite different standards of truth. Can these really be compared?
Yeah, they do. But I mean, if you want to offend a scientist, say it's not a creative profession. You know, it is inherently creative. So for me, it's just they're both inherently creative. They're both fairly speculative, but there's a point where that there's a divergence, right? So for me, it's about honouring discipline. It's not about conflating and say they're the same thing at all. It's about saying these two disciplines need absolutely to be honoured, and how can they work together? Again, if we think about our First Peoples, and if you think about how First Peoples integrate knowledge of the land, astronomy, cultural practice, dance, painting, it's such a beautiful interplay of knowledge. And that's really the heart of it, I think.
That's great. Thank you. So that's all the questions that we have time for. So thanks again, Rose, for an excellent and inspiring presentation.
Thank you.
And I'll now invite Joanna Murray-Smith to say a few words. Before I do, I'd like to thank the whole Murray-Smith family, not only for their support of this lecture over nearly 30 years, but for their ongoing support of the State Library. The number of people attending this lecture year after year speaks of the continuing need for engagement with ideas, research and debate in the way that we've experienced tonight. And it shows the endurance of Stephen Murray-Smith's work and the strength of his legacy. Now, please welcome Joanna Murray-Smith.
Hello. Well, thank you very, very much, Rose. You know, I think the library and the Murray-Smith family had collectively thought it was time that Dolly Parton was mentioned in the Stephen Murray-Smith Memorial Lecture. So we can tick that off the list. It was a wonderful, inspiring, timely topic, and I think a topic that Dad would have, and my mother as well, our mother, would have relished. Dad was very interested in science. He was a very early advocate of conservation, and really his interest in conservation was inspired by the trips to Bass Strait, and perhaps inspired the trips to Bass Strait that we have been making for so many years, half a century, more than half a century. And then again, you know, his trip to Antarctica and his book Sitting on Penguins was a very engaged and engaging assessment of all sorts of scientific aspects of Antarctica and the scholarship around the Antarctic. And I think, and he was, of course, a great, enthusiast, triumphant enthusiast of Australian literature in particular. So the combination of arts and science is a theme that was very close to his heart and an absolutely perfect topic for tonight. So thank you very, very much for being so much at the core of what Dad was interested in. You don't need to persuade me as a playwright about the emotional power of art and its ability to carry ideas. That is my modus operandi. It's the modus operandi of all playwrights. Although, you know, sobbing in your seat as the curtain comes down means something different to me than it probably does. But you know, as you were talking, I had an image that came into my head of standing in the cave at Erith Island as a little girl. Dad had invited some archaeologists to come from ANU to the island, and they had dug a hole in this cave, and we saw the different layers of sand. And I remember the adults and the children standing around the hole, and one of the adults was storytelling and saying, so see that colour there? That was when there was no sea between Tasmania and the mainland, and that colour there was when the first fleet arrived. And the power of that connection of applying, you know, human history and emotion to what we were looking at in the ground in this beautiful rocky abandoned cave was, you know, a very poignant and potent reminder of how storytelling brings the world of ideas in so many different disciplines into our lives. So thank you very, very much. I have to go off now and think about a play about climate change.
Go for it.
Along with everybody else in every company in the world, and let's see if we can make a difference. But it's idealistic, but it's a very welcome form of idealism. So thank you very, very much for those very stimulating ideas and a wonderful Stephen Murray Smith Memorial Lecture. And I speak, of course, on behalf of my sister Cleve and my brother David as well. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Joanna. And I'm serious about thank you for trusting me with this lecture. It was a pretty daunting process, but I'm delighted to be here, and I look forward to the play.
Well, that's great. And I'd also like to thank the State Library, of course, Susie, Sarah Slade, Carlos, for organising tonight and making it possible for so many people to participate. David, Cleve and I are all terribly grateful for the continuing association with the library and this lecture series. And we look forward to many more to come. So thank you very much.